name's Carol May Whittick, and welcome to Her Conversations, Tools for the Awakening Woman. Her is an acronym for Higher Energetic Resonance. This is the optimal state to embody in order to attract our highest desires. And who is the awakening woman? Well, she is a woman who's seeking a greater possibility in her reality, and she's looking for solutions. She knows being awakened is not a lofty ideal, but a necessity. If she can transform herself, she can change the world. Her conversations will introduce you to talented women who will speak to your spirituality, your sensuality, and your soul. They share their stories and explain how they are in service to the world. So let their words in these conversations embolden and inspire you. This week on Her Conversations, my guest is award-winning public speaker, author and singer Shola Kaye. Speaking in public is often listed as one of the most common fears, second only to flying, and it even ranks above the fear of death. While you may think you will never need to hone this skill, being able to confidently communicate in front of a group of people can be life-changing. This can be anything from feeling heard within your peer group or family, presenting your ideas and thoughts in a working environment, or even holding the attention of an audience of hundreds or even thousands of people. During this conversation, Shola shares with me the advantages that introverts have over extroverts, what techniques she uses to prepare before speaking, ways to familiarise yourself to the audience before you get to the stage, and also how to use energy shifts to keep everyone engaged. And of course, there's so much more. So I start this episode, as I always do, by asking the question, HER is an acronym for Higher Energetic Resonance. When do you feel at your most HER?
Well, I'd say that when I am out of my head and more in my body, because I can be a bit of a thinker, and that can often just overcome everything. So it's really about when I make a conscious decision to not be too much in the head, but just really feeling my body and just not being self-conscious and not judging myself, but just being free to be who I am in that moment. So particularly, as a professional singer, whenever I'm singing, I feel, that I'm sort of resonating highly. I also feel that when I'm speaking, if I can just get away from that voice in the head, what are you saying, Shola? Is this okay? Again, just that freedom of feeling fully myself and just in the moment.
Perfect. And everyone has a story. Everyone has experiences in their lives that have brought them from where they were to the work that they're doing now and the offering that they're giving to the world. Just briefly go through what's brought you to what you're doing right now.
Interesting. Yeah, I was very much kind of on that, the track that I guess most people are, which is, you study, you try and get yourself a corporate job, you try and earn as much money as you can, etc., etc. And I was quite a shy person, quite introverted when I was younger, and still am fairly introverted now. And, I went through the motions, got myself a corporate job. And at the time I was living in the States, and Americans are often kind of, I'd say more outgoing and even a little bit more articulate than the typical Brits, which I found quite overwhelming. Anyway, when I moved back to the UK, I had another corporate job. And in this particular job, I found that I really didn't enjoy speaking up during meetings. And given that I was supposed to be consulting people in those meetings, I wasn't able to do my job properly. So I had a bit of a situation where I ended up having my contract terminated after 6 months in this position. And it was then that the journey that I'm on now really began, because instead of just turning around and trying to get another similar job, I really took a bit of time out, trained to be a life coach. Some of the dreams that I'd always had, like taking singing lessons, began at that point. And I kind of used my life coaching training on myself to really explore what it was I wanted from life. And was this track that I was on the right one for me? And I took a bunch of courses and ended up deciding to become a professional singer. So from being afraid to speak up to groups or within groups, then I suddenly was performing and singing on stage to, sometimes tens, hundreds of people. And then from there came public speaking training. I don't know if you've heard of Brendan Bashard, Carol. Do you know of him?
Not familiar, no.
No, he's kind of like a younger version of Tony Robbins, if you like. He's a coach. And I was reading a book of his, and I just had this emotional moment where I started crying. And it was on a chapter about public speaking. And I just took that to mean that my soul was saying, Shola, hey, pay attention. So I ended up taking a bunch of public speaking training, discovered that I really enjoyed it and was good at it to the extent where I won a few awards. And now, I feel that it's part of my mission to help other women who are perhaps stuck in a position where they feel really unempowered around speaking up, and just helping them to see that wherever they are at the moment, that's not where the endpoint has to be. And then in addition to that, reaching out to bigger groups with a combination of singing and speaking. So it's kind of my longer term, to be out there speaking and singing to groups in a personal development and spiritual setting. But yeah, I mean, that's in the future, but that kind of gives you a bit of a flavour of how I got to where I am today.
That's perfect. And it's always interesting finding out how everyone gets to the point that they arrive at and start to be seen at on a wider level. And you mentioned as well that you're an introverted person, and I think we've spoke before, so we're both kind of textbooks INFJs. And it's one of those things, like you say, especially as Brits looking at America, thinking that everyone's so extroverted and outgoing there as well. And it seems very unusual that an introverted person would be the kind of person that would step up. So what do you think the advantages are of an introverted person in them coming forward and speaking up? What advantages would you say an introvert has over an extrovert when they're speaking?
Yeah, it's a good question. And it's funny, I did my Myers-Briggs recently, and I'm now an INTJ, INTP on the cusp sort of thing. So definitely more of a thinker, not a feeler. But yeah, great question about that, because it's funny, I went in and I was doing some corporate training at a company that had assessed all their staff in terms of whether they, their Myers-Briggs, what was their profile. And I had a bunch of introverts and extroverts in the room, and they both had very different reactions to the first session that I ran with them. Where the extroverts didn't, because they weren't prepared to speak and they hadn't kind of done enough work to kind of be ready to stand up there, they point blank refused to take part in the activity. And my translation of that was that perhaps their ego was kind of very involved with them being outgoing, seen as very, popular, chatty, etc. And so if they couldn't display that to the group, then suddenly they were being completely challenged and just felt they couldn't take part. Whereas the introverts, there was much more of a, well, I don't necessarily want to do this, but out of service, I'll just get on with it, because I'm not the sort of person that will make a fuss and attract even more attention towards me by kicking up a stink because I don't want to take part. So it's really interesting. I kind of see this all the time now with my clients, but I think what introverts bring to the table is they tend to prepare more. They tend to be a little bit more, and maybe I'm being biased because I'm an introvert. So I'm kind of like, introverts are, we're so perfect. But introverts, I think they approach public speaking with more humility. So it's not necessarily about them, it's about the service that they're giving to the audience, because they don't necessarily want attention on them. So it's really, there's got to be something really compelling for them to put themselves in a position where all those eyeballs are upon them. So, whether it's they've got a job to do for their work or a cause that they support, there's just a real, there's got to be something that really is pushing them to be in the spotlight. It's not just ego and, pandering to that. So yeah, I think what they bring is a sense of service, as I said, that humility. Because they don't want to be there, they'll tend to prepare very well to make sure that they give good value when they're in front of that audience. And in general, I think they can be better at engaging the audience as well, because they don't want it to be all about them. So in a way, by engaging the audience, you're deflecting the attention a bit away from yourself and putting it back on the audience. So the more engaging you are, the more, obviously it's good for the audience because it becomes a conversation rather than a listen to me, I'm going to stand here and expound for an hour, you know. So yeah, I think that's what, obviously introverts have some issues as well, because perhaps we might speak in a quieter voice. We might look more uncomfortable on stage because we're not used to the limelight. But those are all things that can be worked on. But I feel at the heart of it is just this air of service. And I think that's always a good thing from any speaker.
It's interesting what you say then about how an extrovert, if they don't feel that they're able to perform at that moment, they have to do it. I think from coming from personally as an introvert, is if I don't feel prepared, I'm prepared. If I don't feel prepared on the spot, I kind of tune into something that I think maybe extroverts don't do, because they're always on the go. It seems like they don't give themselves necessarily the time. And again, this is just like an introvert making a blanket judgment on extroverts. But it's like from people that I know who are very extroverted, and then people who I know are very introverted, they're able, they can tap into that still time, whereas extroverts don't seem to give themselves that time. So they haven't got something to pull on. Just a vague kind of, you know, introverts are cool, extroverts they need a moment or two, you know, to kind of feel that the stage is set and they know where everything's going. And interesting about the service, because and if I think about the majority of people that I know who are service based, they are mostly all introverts actually as well. I'm trying to think of, they might have kind of, we can turn it on and make it look like an extroverted personality, but at the end of it you're exhausted and you need to go and reset in that quiet room. So I'm sure you notice, and that's how I can go and do it, and I can do it for a stretch of time, even a number of days, but then I need the reset, and without the reset then it becomes a little bit of a problem. I mean, and how would you say that a shy person could overcome their fear of speaking as well? Because obviously they're just thinking, oh my god, everyone's looking at me, it's who am I, and all of these things come in. What, in your experience personally, and then with working with other shy and introverted people, can you say they can use to bring themselves forward?
Yeah, well, I think what I touched on before, which is tapping into this sense of service, because quite often, even though we're introverts and we come from that place, there isn't an awareness, like a very conscious awareness of, oh wow, yeah, I'm actually here to serve the audience. Because with most people, if they're confronted with public speaking or having to speak publicly, there's this immediate, they're all going to judge me. And once you sort of start delving deeper into what this experience means and talking about what's in it for you as a speaker and for the audience, that's when, you know, when I tend to introduce this idea of, hey, you're of service, then people can calm down a bit and realize the focus isn't on them. They're shining a beam of light on the audience rather than the beam of light shining on them. So it's kind of a reframe in a way, but it's a reframe that most people who want to give the audience a valuable experience, it's one that those people are comfortable with, because it makes sense that it's not about you, it's about them. And then you can just start to regroup around that concept. Other things I say to introverts is practice. Make sure you really practice. Spend plenty of time preparing yourself, because in that preparation, that's another way that you can serve really well. So instead of feeling like you have to wing it or give yourself minimal time, really, you know, take the time over it, and your audience will appreciate that, and you'll appreciate it too. There's also other things you can do, like visualizing friends in the audience, visualizing friendly faces. And another big one is actually going out and meeting the audience before you have to speak. So I was giving a workshop last week, and I thought, okay, well, I was in one room, and then the people that were coming for the workshop were in another room having a cup of tea and a few biscuits, refreshments. And I thought, well, why not just go out and start chatting to those people? So I went out there, not as, oh, I'm the speaker, but just I was mingling with them as another person that's about to participate in this workshop. And then you just get to know a few of the characters. And then when it comes time to speak, you can actually call on them and say, oh yeah, we discussed this earlier, didn't we, Jenny? Or Peter, or whoever. And then it's great for the audience because they're being brought into the conversation. And it's really good for you because it's not like you're speaking to this complete bunch of strangers. Suddenly there are friends there, you know, their issues, you know, why they're there. And all of a sudden it's not really, again, the spotlight's not on you. You're able to shine the spotlight on them. So those are small things, but they do make a big difference in terms of mindset and, you know, how to approach the next speaking opportunity.
That's brilliant. I've got some tips there already as well. As you were speaking, I'm like, okay, that's a really good thing as well. And then once you're on stage as well, what would you say were the main, you know, if you could give like 3 main points and say these are things to consider that are going to make a good speech and effective presentation when you've got to get your message across and you know, have a limited amount of time maybe?
Yes. Well, most definitely one thing that's super helpful is what I call signposting. And it's good for you when you're writing the speech as well as for the audience. And that is when you come out, once you've been introduced, you know, there's the niceties of, you know, how you've opened the speech, perhaps with a disruptor to get people's attention. It's super important at that point to give the audience just a little kind of high level few points about what the talk is about. You know, today I'm going to give you 3 bits of advice on how to, you know, how to save money on your mortgage or whatever it might be. So break it down so people know what's coming, because that's hugely important. I went to a talk by a diplomat yesterday, and she just launched in, didn't tell us what was coming, what was relevant to us, why she was there. And at the beginning, there was this like, oh, this is going to be great. And then you can see the eyes glaze over, the arms. And if she'd just given us a little bit of a signpost so we knew what was happening, what was coming, I think the audience is going to be more receptive. There's more anticipation about what's coming because it's like, oh, this is going to be interesting. Or if it's not, then you just mentally prepare, right? Okay, this is dry as dust. It's good for you also as a speaker because it helps you to organise your talk around certain points and it stops you from going off and waffling. So I'd say that's number one thing that's really important. Another thing is around making sure you know the audience. So making sure you know what they're expecting, what's relevant to them. Maybe even having a few examples or stories that you know what they'll kind of resonate with. So that they appreciate the fact that you've done a bit of research on them, and also you know that everything you're giving them is targeted towards them because it makes everybody feel better. And then the final one is really around, as a speaker, I think, kind of knowing what the point is for you. Why are you there? Because then that will help you with your message, but also making sure that you're not disappointed or you're not kind of, it gives you more of a sense of purpose when you're speaking. And so an example of that might be if someone is going to speak and they're thinking, oh, I hope to get more people on my list as a result of this speech, or I hope to sell my product. But then all they do is they do their speech, and at the very end, they might leave like 2 minutes and say, hey guys, I hope, you know, just put your name on my list, or hey, buy the product, it's going to be at the back. And that's not good for the audience because it feels like an afterthought and it feels like they're being sold to. And it's not good for you because you're not taking the steps you need to and treating your own needs with the appropriate amount of seriousness to make sure the speech, you know, deals with that properly. So I think that's often why people get disenchanted with speakers too. I think you see less of it now, but in the old days where they'd be like, lock the doors, it's time to sell, guys, you know, and then there'd be this really boring presentation with like, I've got the, you know, these 10 videos set and, you know, et cetera, and people feeling very kind of coerced around it. So I think that's a good thing for the speaker to be aware of because it's not good for the audience to be sold to, but there are ways that you can sell or at least raise awareness in a subtle way that becomes part of the presentation rather than like a hook on or an add-on at the very end.
Such good stuff. I'm taking it all in as well. I'm learning so much.
Can't you?
Yeah, honestly, I'm learning as I'm speaking to you now as well. And what would you say? You're on the stage and you're keeping the points in mind. Any other effective ways to keep people engaged and interested in what you're trying to communicate as well? What things that you would use, things that you've seen people do well? I mean, it's, you know, as somebody who aspires to do more speaking myself, I'm always watching, you know, the greats, the mighty ones who can hold the stage and speak to thousands of people. It's like, and watching what they do, it's like, how do you break that down into like, okay, this is where I'm starting and I can use these effective ways, and then work out what they're doing when I'm kind of watching them and dissecting their work.
Yeah. Well, there's quite a few things. I mean, in terms of spotting whether the audience is with you or not, I mean, as I say, the speaker I saw yesterday, people's eyes were glazing over, they were starting to fold their arms. She just carried on, nothing changed, didn't miss a beat in the same kind of pace and kind of words she was using. So the first thing is you've got to have this awareness of what the audience is doing. I mean, as a singer as well, you know, I can tell, okay, not many people are dancing to this one, or okay, they're not tapping their feet, I better change things up. So it's just that it's starting to take that attention off yourself and like, how am I doing? And looking at the audience, you know, how are they doing? Because that's who you're there for, right? So a lot of it is just watching that. Are they snoozing? Are their eyes downcast? Are their eyes glazed over? You know, do they look defensive as you're speaking? All those are tips that you need to change things up. And then in terms of how you can do that, there's sort of changing things up in the moment. So perhaps changing the activity, changing the direction of what you're saying, even asking the audience, hey guys, you know, how you doing? You know, put your hands up if this is what you came here for. And then if they, you know, you can just judge from that response whether it's what you're giving them is right. And then not being afraid in the moment to even say, you know, if people say, oh, well, actually, we thought we were going to get this, say, oh, okay, you know, apologies, I can speak on that topic a little bit for you if you like, you know, and then just being with the audience so that they know this truly is a conversation. It's not a monologue. Then in terms of things that you can build into your presentation from the very beginning, things like asking questions, and they don't even need to be questions where people have to make a physical response, but asking rhetorical questions as you go through the presentation, because that's a way of making sure the audience keep up with you. Other things are like what I call you-focused language. So instead of saying, I went to the doctors and I got a surprise, you might say, guys, have you ever been to the doctors and been shocked out of your mind by what you heard when you were in the surgery? And then you can go on and say what happened to you. But you're framing that first by asking a question. So everybody now is brought into your world and you're in that situation together. And really, truly, everybody's speeches should be punctuated with those kind of questions. Because then that's, as I say, it becomes that conversation rather than, oh, me, I, me, I, me, I. And then another thing, like if you watch great speakers and some of the big motivational speakers, what they do is they build energy shifts into their speeches. So what they're saying is never at the same level, like the rate of speech and energy all the way through. There are ups and downs. So it's like watching a movie. You know, 1 minute they're speaking really fast, and then the next they slow down because they've got something really profound to say. And that's why when a speaker can be really exciting. And if you watch a motivational speaker, like at the end of their speech, if they've got a big message, you'll hear them start to speed up. The sentences will get shorter and shorter. You know, their pitch might be higher a little bit. Their voice will be louder, because that's where they're delivering that really emotional part of the speech where they want to get to you. And unless you're kind of breaking those speeches down and actually really trying to analyze what they're doing, you're so in that moment of, my God, yeah, the energy, oh, yes, that could be me in my life, you're really with them on that. And those are just energy shifts, just taking you through ups and downs, highs and lows, so that you feel like you've been to see a movie, not that you've just sat and listened to somebody speaking for the whole time. So things like that. There's tons of things, you know, like using emotive language, painting the picture so people can imagine themselves physically in a different place. But those are some of the things that you can do to make a speech much more engaging. So it's not, hello, everybody, I am here today. So yeah, a few tips to consider for next time.
Yeah, I mean, we laugh, but it's amazing how many people don't and not aware and just manage to kind of are just totally not aware, you know, and they get by being, maybe that's their thing, maybe that's their USP, is like, this is the monotone guy, you know, and you'll get them from A to B as long as you just hold on as tight as possible. But one of the things I remember, I was watching a Lisa Nichols interview. She was saying that she used a V almost, so
Yeah.
the dip, yeah. So she
Mhm.
started high because, like, you know, she's Lisa Nichols, and look what Lisa Nichols has got. And then, but she takes it down, and she goes down to the point where she was wrapping her son, and all she had was a towel, and she had no money and everything like that. And then she brings it all the way back up as well. So that was one of the things that I remember about how to build a story.
Yeah.
But using them and taking everyone on that journey, because if she came out and went, you know, I'm Lisa Nichols, everyone's like, yeah, but you know, we're not there yet as well. So she was able to bring it down to the point where people in the audience will be like, well, I might not be like that bad off, but at least I know that she knows how to climb out of everything, and respect, and bring everyone with you. So always listening to things like that as well. And you said as well, there's a feeling, and also as a musician as well, you can tell, you know, I've done gigs where you can hear the glasses going, and the rumble and the chatting, you know that it goes. Do you ever feel anything on your body at all? And you can see things like the eyes glazing over, people are folding their arms, or they're starting to turn away and have mini conversations, or worse still, the phones come up. You know, is there, do you ever get a like a physical sense, like a sensory sense of the shift in the room when the energy is lower or higher? Does that ever happen to you?
Yeah, I think it's for me, it's an all over thing, really. You know, so I'm quite a visual person, so that's the main way that I take information in. But you can get a feel like when there's, I've never done a gig where there's hostility, but you can get a sense from people where, you know, perhaps they're not comfortable with you, or they're not into the music or the vibe, or, and it's funny actually, the other day I did an experiment. There was a woman I was performing in a big room, maybe about 100 people, with some people sat at tables, and there was a woman that was on her phone, and her eyes were downcast on the phone. And I thought, okay, if I just look at her and just send some energy towards her, is she going to look up? And so I just sang a couple of words looking right at her. And yeah, she did look up, and she's like, oh, you know, looks a bit embarrassed that she's been on the phone. But I think, you know, you can, it's funny, I did a course, it was on cabaret actually. And there was a lot of work on intention and on kind of painting situations in your mind, or different kind of scenarios where your energy would be different, that you're kind of sending out to the audience.
Mm-hmm.
And the audience that was there, we were talking to them about, well, how did that feel? You know, if I pretended that I was, you know, at Carnegie Hall with 1,000 people in front of me, versus I was at like a little jazz club and there were 10 people, you know, how does the energy feel? So most definitely you can, when you're speaking as well, you can have a certain intention for the speech and for the audience, and just kind of put that out there. And then the energy will come back to you, and you'll see if that's working, and take it from there.
That's a great one. And shifting from energetic to more physical, what kind of physical preparations do you do before you go on stage to speak?
Yeah. Well, I tend to do a few things. I guess I don't feel nerves so much now, so I don't really do the deep breathing. But deep breathing can be super helpful if you're somebody that finds you're getting a bit panicked around having those eyes upon you. So, you know, as you're sitting in the audience before the time to go up and speak, you know, just kind of make sure that you breathe nice and slowly, because you can't, the way the body works is you can't physically have those same kind of nerves and potential for blacking out if you're breathing and taking that air into your body. So diaphragmatic breathing, where as you breathe in, you want to feel your belly and your kind of diaphragm area expanding, rather than kind of when you breathe like that and everything goes in, that's the wrong kind of breath. You want to breathe and you want to feel your belly go out. So if you put your hands on your belly and your rib cage, it should move outwards away from you as you breathe in. So that's a really good technique. Also things like, and I've seen performers do this as well in the changing room, you may want to jump up and down a bit, or just at least sort of shake your hands, shake your legs in your seat, because our bodies are filled with a surge of energy before we go and speak. And that's because our bodies know that we're about to do something that requires us to be on top form. And so it's just preparing us for that. And people often feel that surge of energy and they interpret it as fear, which is a misinterpretation. It's not fear, it's just your body getting you ready. So often to kind of help dissipate that excess energy, if you just sort of shake your hands and shake your feet, etc., that will help to get rid of that and help to steady you. And that's one I still use now. And then things like people going in the loos and doing sort of press ups against the wall, and all sorts of things. And even to ground yourself, imagining that you've got roots from your feet going into the ground, or that you've got heavy stones in your pockets. They slow you down and they make everything happen a little bit slower at a calmer pace. All those sorts of things can really, really help. And as I do that, because I tend to speak really fast, but as I visualize those stones, I'm like, yeah, I can slow down. And it really, really, really does work. So those are the few of the things that I do. I mean, there are many, many more, and it really depends on your approach and how you feel about public speaking as to what you choose. But, visualizations, self-talk, writing lists of affirmations to read right before you go on stage. There's all manner of things that you can do to help you feel more prepared.
Fantastic, thank you. And now, with every woman who comes on to her conversations, I have a list of questions, closing questions, just to delve into you a little bit more personally. And the first of those questions is, what is the best piece of advice a woman has ever given to you?
Yeah, I mean, I can't remember the source of this advice, if I'm honest, but for me, any advice that's around just being yourself is super powerful, because I think all of us feel pressure to be, not necessarily to be what we're not, but to kind of be performing at a higher level all the time, whether that's we need to be the self that makes more money, or the self that's more attractive to people, or the self that's more assertive, or who do we have to be? We've always got to be this something which is just a little bit out of reach. And while I think it's important to strive to be the very best that we can be, there's a lot to be said for just accepting, okay, this is me, this is it, and then once you've allowed yourself to kind of have a few deep breaths and accept who and what you are, then you can be in a more kind of a more controlled way, start to think about where you want to go, rather than just either following the crowd or having that momentum behind you, which is perhaps from childhood or family or expectations of other people. It's got to be about you and where you want to go and who you want to be. And maybe it's fine just where you are, and you've got to start with that as the baseline. And then after that, you can start to think, well, what's next? But just accepting who you are in that present moment and being okay with that. So that's I think that's, whenever I hear that in any book or ebook or audiobook or whatever, or video, it's like, yeah, that's the big one for me. Just be yourself, be okay with it.
That's brilliant. And it's I think more and more that's coming to the fore really as well. And it's more of us are becoming aware that being ourselves and being as individual as we are is actually a benefit to the world, as opposed to us just churning it out and being one of X amount of thousands of people. Well, that's why there's so much struggle a lot of the time, is because we're trying to fit something that we were never meant to fit in at all. We're all individuals. So that's a great one. I really like that you've kind of reiterated that one as well. And the more that we can hear it from different voices, the more it will start to seep in as well. Like with anything, we need to hear it time and time again before it's like, okay, I'm going to hear that, I'm going to start to act on that, and then keep hearing it. Because there's moments when you're like, what am I doing? My stuff's so different from anyone else as well. I understand that as well. In doing this, even I was like, this is so different, why do I want to do this? And then it's like, but that's the reason to do it, is because it's different. So I totally understand that one. Appreciate your answer. So also, which female now do you think represents that higher energetic resonance?
Well, for me, it's funny, because when I wrote my book, How to Be a Diva at Public Speaking, what I wanted to do is give women alternative role models. Because when we hear about great speakers, we hear, Winston Churchill, or even, Barack Obama, Martin Luther King. They're guys, and not that what they had to say wasn't relevant or important, but I think women need to look to women sometimes to kind of find speakers that we really can enjoy, or people that we can enjoy and kind of use as role models. So what I tend to do is I look at singers like, Adele for being very authentic, or Beyonce as being kind of an all-rounder and therefore very valuable when she's on stage. And, even people like Lady Gaga or Pink, because they're very quirky and dynamic. And this idea that we can be any or all of those as we need to, when we're in an on-stage situation. But then what I also do is I talk about role models can, be from our personal lives as well. We don't have to look to, the rich, the famous, the political, the whatever, to be great role models. So I often talk about I was fostered as a kid, and my foster mum has been an amazing role model for me, because she was somebody that just really came from love. She fostered children for many years, even where it was, I wouldn't say detrimental to herself, but she was kind of spending her own money on looking after her foster kids. It wasn't something she was doing for money. She had a big family of her own, all of whom loved her very dearly, and she was one of those people that you could always count on for support. And whatever situation you were in, she would tell you as she really felt it, but whatever she told you was just coming from this place of love. And so for me, that's, if I have to kind of call upon any role model for any area of my life, it's always her. And I even speak about her in most of my speeches to say, hey guys, it might be your grandmother, might be your mother, might be someone you know personally. We can look at these people that are famous, but don't ignore the people that were in your life or are in your life, because they probably have given you just as much, if not more. So yeah, I mean, my foster mum represents that kind of higher energetic resonance for me. She wasn't particularly spiritual, I guess. I mean, she was in her own way, but she just embodied it. It wasn't like, okay, these are the learnings, this is the teaching. She just was that. And that's often the biggest and the best example, when you are a walking, talking, living example of, what it is that you're trying to convey, which in her case was love.
That's perfect. That's beautiful. And great what you say about the fact that it's not always about looking to public figures or celebrated figures, because as more and more things are being revealed, we're realizing that not everything that glitters is gold. Not every person that we've placed upon a pedestal for years and years and years has actually been who they've been representing to us. And sometimes it's been to the detriment of their lives, if we go into the extreme really as well. And it's always those people who are coming from the purest place that are the ones that make the biggest impact in our lives really. And it's always the ones that you call up after you kind of strip away the glitz and the so-called glamour of everything. It's that person that fed you on a real level that is the one that embodies that as well. And do you have a self-care ritual, favorite self-care ritual or practice that you do?
Yeah, good question. I guess I meditate a bit. I mean, I wish I did it more, and I wish I think it's the T of my INTP. It's very hard to stop the brain like just clacking away. So I would like to have even more control of that. I read somewhere, someone said, like, you've got to make your mind your bitch, I kind of want to be able to do that better. So that's kind of a long-term goal for me. But, the typical things like, having the occasional day when I just kind of hang out in my dressing gown and just kind of just turn everything off and have it all about me. Exercising, I guess that's something that if I don't do it, after a while I start to feel kind of antsy and like, okay, something's out of whack in my life. So there's nothing kind of and also singing, and I'm lucky that I get paid to do that, that I find singing is very therapeutic and very healing, and I think that helps me to stay grounded, most definitely.
Perfect. Thank you. And what's next for you now? What are the next projects? What are you working on? You said you've written a book. Could you speak a bit more about the book that you've written as well? Because I love the title as well.
Oh yes, yeah. So earlier this year I wrote a book called How to Be a Diva at Public Speaking. And so that book is part nuts and bolts about public speaking, and it's part this idea of how can you be an all-rounder speaker. or if you don't want to be an all-rounder, or if you're starting somewhere, how can you play on your strengths? And then you can just take your time to fill in the rest of the gaps, if you like. And it's written, because it's got the word diva in the title, a lot of people think it's written for women, but diva is this acronym which is dynamic, inspiring, valuable, and authentic. And that applies to both men and to women. So I've had men read it and they're like, oh yeah, this isn't for women at all, I got loads from this. So what I kind of want to do is promote the book a lot more, do a lot more speaking gigs off the back of that. And I've got some, like a gig in Birmingham, kind of big goal. I'd really love to speak in the USA a couple of times next year in 2018. And then also I've got plans for another book, which is really more about thinking on your feet and how to learn frameworks that you can use so that you're ready to answer any question at any time, and really kind of sharp thinking at your kind of sharpest. So that's kind of the plan for next year. And then also I've created a few online courses, so to kind of get those up and running and out there, and workshops, and just a bunch of things, more singing and spiritual development, singing in those sorts of arenas. So lots to do. People always say focus, but I find it hard.
And when you're a creative person, the ideas just keep coming in as well all the time, and it's you've got to do one thing at a time, but then it's like one thing will inspire like 5 different things, and you can see which way it can go. But it's a blessing, isn't it, really, to abundance is messy. I remember someone said that to me recently as well. It's like one of the things we always think, it's like when I get this and I get that, it'll be organized, but usually when it starts coming in, it's just coming in like this. And the same with ideas. If you start with one, then it's like all coming in. It's for you to kind of just try and manage them in the best way as well. But it's a good thing. But I can see all of that happening, of course, So and so how can we find you? How can we connect with you online and in the real world?
Yeah, well, I'm on the usual kind of, I'm available at the usual outlets, such as, so my web address is just sholakaye.com, and you can find out about my talks, my workshops, my book. There's a link to my Amazon page there. I'm also on Twitter as Speak Up Diva, and Facebook and Instagram, Speak Up Like a Diva, which is my business name. LinkedIn, Shola Kaye, and get in touch. Feel free to, reach out to me. I'd love to hear from you. If you contact me on Twitter, probably you won't hear anything back. So the best one is really good old fashioned, use my website and just use the contact form there to get in touch. But I would love to hear from anybody that's heard any of this, and if they, enjoyed anything or found any particular tips that were useful, or any response to anything I've said. So please do get in touch.
That's perfect. So I just want to say thank you so much, Shola, for taking the time out and being part of Her Conversations, especially in its infancy as well as it's starting to build and grow as well. It's in having conversations with women like yourself that are doing so much different work is inspiring me, and that's what's kind of firing all of these ideas. And but I've got to take my time and make sure it's all done well for the best of the ability of this project, but also for the best of everyone who gets involved in it, so that we can all rise together. So just want to say thank you again for your time.
Brilliant. Thank you for the opportunity. It's been really great to be interviewed, and you've done such a really good job. So thank you for the chance to be one of your pioneer interviewees. Brilliant.
Thank you again to Shola, and thank you again for joining me for another week and another episode of Her Conversations. Remember, if you press subscribe on whatever channel you're listening to, you'll get instant notifications when a new episode comes out each week. If you need to reach out to me, just reach out to me on my website, which is carolmaywhittick.com. That's carolmaywhittick.com. And you can also find me on Facebook under the same name, or Twitter, or on Instagram under Kazmic. So that's CAZMICK. So until the next time, have a great week. Take care.